Okay, so welcome to today's Basis Technologies webinar, where today we're going to be talking about how we can use automation to help us ensure that we can ensure continuous innovation during S/4HANA migrations and upgrades. And really, as you can see from the subtitle, what we were trying to do is to make change freezes as far as possible a thing of the past. My name is Kevin Callahan. I'm a DevOps solution specialist with Basis Technologies. My background is very much in the SAP Basis world, which I've been doing for about 27 years now. In that time, I've obviously had a lot of experience with upgrades and change management in general. And for the past just over 5 years, I've been working as a DevOps solution specialist for Basis Technologies, focusing on change management, change control for SAP customers, as well as testing automation. So what we're going to look at today is a few introductory slides on, for example, why do change freezes happen and what is the impact of change freezes? And looking in particular at customers' journeys towards S/4HANA, how that can result in the requirement to have multiple change freezes as you move towards S/4HANA from your existing ECC implementations. We'll then look at how we can use automation to help eliminate those change freezes and what the impacts are. And really the real meat of this presentation is looking at a few real world examples of how our customers have used our automation technology in order to help them on their path to S4, and also with maintaining their S4 landscapes and also just maintaining their ECC landscapes. Throughout this presentation, if you have any questions, you can enter your questions in the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And we'll try and answer as many of those at the end of the presentation as we can. Basis Technologies itself has been around for just over 25 years. We are headquartered in the UK. Although we do have a global presence, we have offices in Europe, in the United States, and in Australia. And we are very much focused on software automation for SAP customers. We only do SAP. And really, we're most focused on the ability to allow DevOps and continuous delivery within SAP environments, something that's traditionally been very, very difficult to do. And we like to say that we have the most complete DevOps and test automation platform that's specifically engineered for SAP. We have many customers in many different industries all over the world, and you can see some of the logos of our bigger customers on the slide here. So what's the problem? This is a direct quote from one of our customers. And what a lot of IT people struggle with now is whenever they want to do a technical change effectively, the business wants to carry on making changes to systems all the way up to the cutover. Now, in the past, we as the IT people often had to go to the business and say, well, I'm afraid there is going to come a point when we're going to have to stop accepting your changes. And I remember back in the day when I first started in SAP, whenever we needed to do an upgrade, we would have a 6-week change freeze. I did actually work on one project where it literally was an 8-week change freeze. And that was kind of acceptable 20 years ago. But as people's expectations of the ability to deliver change rapidly into their IT environments has progressed, that is becoming less and less acceptable. So we need to make sure that we have everything in place so that we can eliminate these change freezes, or at the very least reduce them to maybe just a couple of days. And really the main problem here is that whenever there is a change freeze, we are holding back the business. The business just needs to be able to continuously deliver improvements to their core systems. And remember, a lot of these systems are now customer facing. When I first started in SAP was very much a back office system. But now we have customers directly interfacing with our SAP system. So our businesses need to be able to deploy changes constantly and keep those systems up to date to meet the customer expectations. Now, when it comes to our migration to S/4HANA, we could end up in a situation where as part of that S4HANA journey, we have to do multiple change freezes. So if we're looking at this slide from the bottom, we may need to upgrade our existing systems before we even start on that journey. We then might have to do a migration to the cloud, or so maybe to a cloud provider. Then we have to do the migration to S4 itself. And when we've got S4, we have to keep it upgraded and keep it in maintenance. And all of those could require change freezes. Hasso Plattner himself, a few years ago, said that he thought that the average SAP customer was probably about 6 years behind the latest release. And my own experience bears that out. Last year, I worked with a customer who was upgrading from ECC EHP6 to ECC EHP7. Now, EHP6 came out in 2012. EHP7 came out in 2013. So they were upgrading from a 10-year-old release to a 9-year-old release. And this is not uncommon. So a lot of customers are quite a long way behind the curve of where SAP ideally would like them to be. And so you have this possibility that you need to upgrade before you even start on your journey. But even once you're in S4 land, you're going to have to do potentially more frequent upgrades. With S4, the release strategy for S4 involves a new release every year with support package stacks and feature pack stacks, which is basically the S4 equivalent of enhancement packs, coming several times a year. And every time you want to implement one of these updates, you may need to do a change freeze. So what we need to think about is how can we avoid these change freezes? Now, obviously, the traditional way of doing that is to run an N+1 project. So you have your existing, let's say, ECC landscape, and then you start, build a new S4 landscape, and you do your S4 project in that new landscape. But one of the problems you've got there is how do you synchronize those landscapes? How do you keep track of all the changes? Because while you're building and developing your S4 landscape, you're obviously continually changing your ECC landscape. Those ECC changes need to be reflected in the new S4 landscape. How do you go about identifying any conflicts between the two? So if you've got a change that's happening in your ECC landscape, but also that same object has already been changed in the S4 landscape, you need to be able to identify those conflicts and resolve those conflicts. And then how do you synchronize those changes across the tracks? So if you're doing a phased migration to S4, then one of the things you're likely to end up with is 2 production systems, one ECC production system and one S4 production system. So for example, you might be moving to S4 on a company by company basis within your organization. So any changes need to be synchronized. So a tax rate change, for example, it needs to go into your ECC production at the same time as your S4 production. And this has always been the challenge with N+ whatever landscapes, N+1 landscapes, for example. So how do you keep track of all those changes? How do you identify all of those conflicts? And how do you synchronize changes across the tracks? So when N+1 first came out, and when I first started in SAP, I mean, we didn't really think about N+1. And then N+1 came out, and it was very much a case of manually keeping track of everything. But now there are automation tools, and we are able now to automate multi-track development. And this gives us some really big benefits if you implement that automation correctly. For a start, it means that you're basically not blocking innovation. You're constantly able to carry on innovating in your productive landscape at the same time as developing your new landscape. You're continuing to be able to offer the business support. So you can, it used to be the case that we used to say there comes a point when we'll only make changes to the production landscape for priority 1 tickets. Now you can continue supporting the business for all sorts of different problems. And it gives you a lower risk and higher confidence in the result at the end of it. So we've got a few slides here where we just talk about multi-track best practice, and we're looking here at a typical N+1 scenario, where on the top in the blue we have our BAU or production support landscape. So changes flow normally from dev to QA to a regression test environment and into production. And then there's a BAU merge process where all those changes that have gone to production are merged into our upgrade landscape. So yeah, the landscape at the bottom. And here we have the conflict detection process. So your automation needs to be able to do that automatic conflict detection, where it can say, okay, this object has changed in ECC, but it's also been directly changed in the DV1 system, my upgrade development system. There's a potential conflict there that needs to be resolved. But importantly, it also needs to be able to accurately recognize where there hasn't been a conflict, and we can do an automatic merge or an automatic retrofit. So that's one key part of your automation in a multi-track environment. Another key thing is this little bit on the left, which is the conflict detection at the time you make a change. So traditional conflict detection has happened at the time you want to merge, when you want to merge that change that's gone to production and merge it into your upgrade development system. But it's also really, really useful if you can have that conflict detection at the time somebody makes a change. So let's say somebody wants to make a change to an object in your BAU development system. At that time, your automation software should be able to look across to your upgrade development system and say, has this object already been changed in that system? And if it has, it should flag it to the person who wants to make the change in the BAU system. And the idea there is that there's a bit of communication that needs to happen between the person who made the change in the upgrade system and the person who made the change in the BAU system, so that they can start resolving that conflict or that potential conflict even before the change has really been made in the BAU system. And then there's the process where once you've merged your changes and you're doing your development in the upgrade environment, at some point those changes need to come into the BAU environment when you're ready to start with your upgrade. And then there's the cutover itself. So all your changes from the upgrade environment have gone through. You now have an upgraded production system, and you want to now upgrade effectively your BAU landscape. And there are a few ways of doing that. There's a process called reverse merge, where all of those changes can be merged back into the BAU dev and QA systems. What some customers will do is they will actually move systems around the landscapes. So for example, your DV1 and QA1 would become your new BAU development and QA systems. So that's a few slides on how to start off the process of looking at how we can do multi-track development. And with the automation behind that, you can have this really truly parallel effort. So we looked at what we call inline conflict detection. So inline conflict detection, which is the conflict detection at the time somebody wants to make a change. It really promotes communication between different teams, and it really means that those conflicts are much less likely to happen when you come to do the merge, because you've already taken them into account as part of your development process. It helps with downgrade protection. So once a change has come through your production system and is being merged into your upgrade system, it's not going to downgrade something. And it helps to keep environments in sync, so that you can be really confident that when you so that your for example, your development system in the upgrade landscape accurately reflects what is already in your production landscape in the BAU landscape. And it also keeps the business moving. So as I said before, it used to be, we would say there'd be a certain cutoff point where we say, right, from now on, we're only going to take P1 or P2 incidents into our production system as part of for the upgrade project. And that might be 6 or 8 weeks before the upgrade was actually due to happen. Now, with our automation and the conflict detection and all of the tools and facilities that gives us, we can actually allow the business to keep making changes. They can actually, continue innovating, and they can continue improving the user and customer experience in the production system, all the way up to really the point of the upgrade or the cut over to S4. So at Basis Technologies, as I said, we produce software that helps us to achieve that automation aspect of change management in the SAP environment. And Active Control is our flagship product here. It gives us really fast, flexible, and safe change and release automation. So it's got 70+ built-in analyzers that are constantly checking your changes as they move through the landscape, whether that's a single track landscape or a N+1 landscape for an upgrade project, or N+1 landscape for an S4 transition. So it's making sure that all of those transports, by the time you come to put them into production, they are safe, they are checked, they are in the right order, all of the relevant testing has been done, etc., etc. You can have Active Control also has integration with elements of the DevOps toolchain, so that you can integrate at whatever point you like throughout your change lifecycle to tools like Jenkins to fire off automated test scripts, for example. It has built-in transition support for S4HANA migrations. There are specific functionalities and analyzers within Active Control that are designed to help you with your S4HANA migration project. One of which is integration with SmartShift. So SmartShift is a tool for code remediation for moving from ECC to S4, and Active Control has integration with SmartShift to do that automatically. And it also allows us to oh, sorry, I lost my screen. Gives us a fast implementation. So we can drastically increase the speed of change throughout our SAP environments, giving us really high return on investment. Let's look at a few interesting stories from our customers who have used Active Control's functionality in the first couple of examples in their migration to or transition to S4. So in this example, it looks quite a simple slide, but behind it is a very, very complex scenario. So this is a very, very big customer. They had one development system, but that fed multiple production systems, 12 different production systems in their ECC landscape. And that ECC landscape was their whole supply chain and their finance system. And they decided that what they wanted to do was move all of their finance functionality to one central, simple finance system running S4. There were lots of potential challenges there. They're basically stripping out bits of functionality from one set of systems and putting it into another system. So they did this in a phased approach for different parts of their organization. So basically each one of their production systems supported a different part of their organization. One of the big challenges with this was, okay, we're taking, so for example, some finance config and we're building it in S4. Well, that's kind of quite easy, building the S4 stuff. But all the while they're doing that, they have to make changes to finance config. But they're also making changes to supply chain config, logistics config and sales and distribution config. And we need to make sure that only the things that are relevant for the S4 system are actually merged into that S4 finance track. So what they did is they implemented the S4 finance track as an N+1 underneath their ECC track, and using functionality within Active Control, they were able to split transports. So for example, a transport which contained finance config could not also contain materials management config. Yeah, so there's functionality in Active Control that allows you to say this object cannot share a transport with this object. So that then helped them to identify and separate out those things that were relevant for S4 and not relevant for S4. Then there's also the remediation side of things, so the code remediation. So certain code that runs in ECC will not run in an S4 system unless it's been hammerized. So changes need to be made to allow it to run in an S4 environment. This is where potentially SmartShift integration can happen, but you can also set up flags, even if you don't have that SmartShift integration. You can also set up rules within Active Control to say, okay, if it's a bit of code that's going to S4 and it's coming from ECC, it needs to have had this certain type of testing and it needs to have these checks done against it. So you can do that kind of remediation. So that's all fine for building out that first, or doing that first migration of the first part of their organization to S4. Once that bit of the organization's been done, they then have effectively 2 production systems. Most of their business is still running on ECC, but this one part of the business is running all of their finance on their S4 system. So when they need to make changes for that company that's on S4, they will start doing those changes in the S4 track. Those S4 changes may need to also go back to the ECC landscape. And this is particularly important when they decide, when they're deciding where should certain data be mastered. So obviously at the start, everything is mastered in ECC. But at some point, they get to a situation where they say, right, we've got enough finance config, we've got enough finance happening in our S4 system that really now all of our finance data should be mastered in the S4 system. And this is where another functionality within Active Control comes in, which allows you to say this type of data or these particular objects cannot be maintained in this system. And so they would do a flip over, so that finance data, which originally could only be mastered in ECC, now can only be mastered in S4. And because of that, you've got changes now flowing the other way. We've got changes from S4 finance flowing back to the remaining finance systems in the ECC landscape. So we're having to synchronize all those deployments and kind of do that almost two-way merge process. And they were able to do this all using functionality within Active Control. And of course, while they're running ECC, some bits of their organization still running finance in ECC, other bits of their organization running finance in S4, they still have to be able to handle S4 upgrades. So S4, especially in the early days, was constantly being updated. And as we saw on a previous slide, there's going to be a new release of S4 every year, and feature packs 2 or 3 times a year, and support packs 2 or 3 times a year. So they need to keep that up to date as well. So again, they would use functionality within Active Control to allow them to do that as well. This is quite a complex scenario. This is a multi-year project, but the functionality within Active Control really helped automate the whole process of making sure the changes flowed from the correct system to the correct system, and the changes were not mixed where they shouldn't be mixed. Changes could automatically be deployed and merged where that was appropriate, and really help cut down on the need for long change freezes. So that's quite a complex scenario there. This is a bit of a simpler scenario. This is a brownfield S4 HANA migration. And basically, as well as moving their data center from an on-premise system to what was HANA Enterprise Cloud. And basically, they used, again, Active Control, set up a fairly straightforward N+1 landscape, and did all of those things that we've already spoken about, did all that conflict detection, did all that automatic merge, manual merge where necessary, but mostly automatic merge, and were able to really reduce the risk by eliminating all the manual effort, and help with the implementation of future upgrades. And then we come to the scenario where you're not migrating to S4, and quite a few customers still haven't made that decision, or at least haven't started making those plans yet. So with another customer, it's just pure business suite, but it's quite a big environment. They've got 21 production systems, 74 non-production systems. And again, they're using Active Control to manage N+1 for their annual SAP upgrades, as well as N+1 for their BAU development and ongoing project work. And what they were seeing was, with the automation, was changes were flowing faster. There was a lot less manual effort, many fewer errors. And a really nice statistic: over 90% of the changes could automatically be merged between the tracks. So very few of their changes actually had to have any sort of manual intervention to make sure that conflicts were dealt with. So looking more broadly at the benefits of orchestration and automation, we've seen with customers, and these are figures that have come from surveys of customers, that cost of change is drastically reduced, cut in half. Is much less error prone, much less manual effort. So it's about 95% more efficient just by cutting out all the manual effort that's required. It can allow delivery up to 50 times faster for new features and enhancements, and has a much greater reduction in system downtime and in change freeze duration. So to summarize, for a start, S4HANA migration isn't a one-off project. You don't just go to S4HANA and then everything goes back to the way it was for ECC. A lot of people are sitting on ECC releases that, okay, they're doing their patching, but they're sitting on ECC releases that are about 10 years old. S4HANA really won't let you do that. At the very, very least, I think the latest is that you will have to upgrade S4HANA at least once every 5 years. But really, you're going to have to do upgrades and or feature pack installations every year. So annual upgrades are coming. We need to be able to stop the idea that a business has to keep dealing with change freezes. Change freezes, as we said, they block innovation. They freeze the business. Change freezes don't freeze systems, they freeze businesses. Active control will help solve the S4 change freeze challenge. The automation within the RM+1 functionality delivers really lasting value. And even when you're not doing an S4 migration, when you're not doing an S4 or ECC upgrade project, N+1 allows you to be really, really flexible with your own developments, with your own implementations. So lots of further information that's available. We have an ebook that's available on our website, plenty of recorded webinars. We have a blog series, so please feel free to have a look at any of those. Thank you very much for your time. Let's just have a look. I see that there have been a few questions posted, so if you just give me a second, I will have a look at those. So we have had a question about running ECC and S4 in parallel with two different company codes. This is theoretically possible. So there's one company code in ECC and another in S4. I think this is a similar scenario to the first customer slide we looked at, where one part of the business was still using ECC and another part of the business was still using S4. This is possible. It's basically the company code is a key on many configuration tables. And the way that Active Control's segregation functionality works is a lot of it is based on table keys, or can be based on table keys. So if you have a configuration table where you're making one configuration entry for company code 1000 and a different configuration setting for company code 1001, we can make sure that only company code 1000 is able to be changed in ECC and 1001 can only be changed in S4, etc. So that is possible. Oh, another question's just come up. About SAP notes. Yes, SAP notes, obviously you might get an SAP note that you need to apply to your ECC system, but you don't need to apply to S4. Yeah, that's absolutely possible. You would just mark it as not being relevant for S4. So that's perfectly possible, and that's not even that applies not just to an ECC to S4 transition. It could be you're upgrading ECC from support package 6 to support package 8. Sorry, enhancement pack 6 to enhancement pack 8. The note might not be relevant for your enhancement pack 8 system, and you just basically say it's not relevant for that system. It's absolutely fine. So that's not a problem at all. Oh, I've been asked to display a slide for additional resources. Yes, let me see if I can do that. There we go. I hope that helps. We've also had another question about if you're doing a phased S4 migration. And so this is very similar to the first customer slide where, okay, so they've got some bits of their business already using S4 and other bits of the business still on ECC, but then you want to upgrade S4. But you don't want to impact, obviously, those parts of the business that are already using S4. So you've already got an N+1 landscape. One track is ECC, one track is S4. You just create another landscape. So you work on N+2. And Active Control fully supports that. So now you've got this N+2 landscape, which is your upgrade landscape for S4. And that's absolutely fine. And we have had customers who have actually had N+10 at various stages for quite specific things, but Active Control is very good at supporting multiple tracks and synchronizing changes across all of those. So that's all fine. Does the tool support selective data migration? No. So Active Control is not a data migration tool. I'm afraid not. No. So that, I think, is all of the questions. Unless anybody has any further questions, then we can bring this webinar to a close. Thank you very much for your time. I hope it's been informative and helpful. You're very welcome. Thank you. And great. Thanks very much, and hope to see you on future webinars in our series.